Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome to another episode of Living Naturally with Michaela. I'm your host, Michaela, and today we're diving into a topic that's both deeply personal and universally relevant: how to live a soul led life. Have you ever wondered why some choices feel right on paper but leave you feeling empty, while others, even uncertain or risky, bring a deep sense of peace and fulfillment? Well, joining me today is the incredible Angelica del Carmen. Angelica is a mystic, spiritual coach, and personal development expert with over 25 years' experience. Her mission is to empower people to connect with their higher self and to live authentically, embracing their unique gifts. Together, we'll explore the profound difference between ego driven and soul led choices and how these decisions shape our happiness, purpose, and overall well being. So, get ready for an eye opening conversation filled with practical insights, personal stories, and tools to help you align with your inner truth. So, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's dive into this soulful journey. So, welcome, Angelica. I'm so happy to have you here again. So, for those of you who are just tuning in for the first time, Angelica actually is one of my recurring guests, and she will be joining me each third Friday of each month. So, so you can tune in on the third Fridays if you want to see more about what Angelica has to say. So, I like to say that she kind of helps us with the spiritual side of the body, mind, and spirit equation. So, Angelica, hi. Happy to
Hey,
have you here yet again. So, how's things going?
everything's good. Thank you for having me once again. And I love being on your show because although I do bring in that spiritual, it's also more of the practical, right? It's not just the
Yes.
spiritual, it's the practical. Like, let's talk about how we get these things done in the real world.
Exactly, exactly. And I feel like this is such an important element that we need to talk about because it is part of the whole being. That's why it's called body, mind, and spirit. And I often preach that they're all interconnected and you cannot separate them. One affects the other. And so many people neglect their spiritual side. And so I believe that these conversations really need to happen because like I said, people re- they neglect the spiritual side, but some people also don't understand their spiritual side. So this is also about understanding the spiritual aspects of things, and that spiritual isn't always about religion. And a lot of people just think, oh, spirit is religion. It's not. So I think that's very important for people to understand. So
Right.
let's start, since we're going to be diving into the whole ego versus soul led. Okay, I think a good place for us to start is kind of like a little definition, if you will. So, from my perspective, ego driven choices often stem from fear, societal expectations, or a need for a validation, whereas soul led choices are more along the lines of aligning with one's higher purpose and inner truth. So, would you agree with that? How would you explain the difference, from your perspective?
For me, the best way to explain it is when it's ego driven, like you said, it's based out of fear. It's, are we doing this because we're fearing something? When it's soul led, there's no fear. And usually the giveaway for me is it's more than about you. When we have a goal, when we have something, when we're living our life through our soul, it usually is a bigger picture. It usually involves more of a, okay, this is going to help me in my life. Obviously, we're human, right? We
Right.
want things to work for us. But usually when our soul is the one leading the way, we feel different. We feel more lighter. We feel more expansion.
Yeah.
And it's a higher for like a lot of the mystical and spiritual people use different words. One of those cliche phrases is it's for the highest good of all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to me, that's the biggest difference. Am I focused in my little box of how do I do this for me? Or how does this actually serve and help others?
Yeah. Yeah. So, like in my journey, as a naturopath and energy healer, I have seen how much of decision making is influenced by external pressures about what
Hmm.
we should do rather than what feels right deep inside.
Hmm.
And I think that's what a lot of people are missing is that they are trying to put external values rather than going within and figuring out what actually feels right. Does that make sense? Does that have been your experience as well?
It has, but here's the thing. Let's throw in a kicker. Many of us don't remember what it feels like anymore. We've become so disconnected from even our feelings, or so judgmental, maybe is the word I want to use,
Hmm.
about, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I need to make myself feel this way. But it's true, inside of ourselves, inside of all of us, we have that feeling of this feels good, this doesn't. But then it's the what thought do you put right after that?
Right, right. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about ego driven versus soul led. Okay, so
Mhm.
ego gets a bad rap. Okay,
Mhm.
so you always hear it's like you got to put your ego aside. So ego gets a bad rap, but ego isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think ego is good in its place because it helps keep us safe when
Mhm.
safe is needed. And it's more about the balance of ego versus soul, if you will. So, from your perspective, do you feel that these two things can coexist, or do you feel like they're always in conflict? What has been your personal experience with this?
Okay, my personal life, personal experience is they're always in a battle. But the reason is because we want to make it a battle. Because everything that the soul tells us, that intuition, that gut feeling, that good feeling that we're talking about, is always for our highest good and usually for the highest good of everybody else. But the reason it fights with the ego is because the way I explain the ego, it's, you're right, it's that little piece of our mind that's trying to keep us safe.
Mm.
The thing is, we have distorted in our heads, in our life, in our beliefs, in our opinions, and everything. What are we staying safe from? So we're constantly fighting. Our ego mind is constantly fighting with like that soul led whatever it's leading us to, because we're like, okay, well, that sounds great. Like, let's give an example. Okay, that sounds great to go help the needy or do this, but
Right,
I need to feed my family first.
right,
Or this is great, but I need to do this first. So we're in a constant battle with ourselves because we don't want to let go of the things that we have predetermined or have been told or have been conditioned or are called
right,
society we need to do first. So I think that's where the ego spirit battle is, because although we innately know this is going to be what's best for fill in the
right,
blank,
right,
but how do I do it? But why would I do it? But why do I have to share and they don't? Why do I have to forgive and they don't? It's a constant fight in our own head. So
right.
that would be the short of my answer.
No, 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 no. That's okay. No, no. From my own personal perspective, I've had my own battle with ego versus spiritual. I think a lot of people who have heard my story or have followed me a while, they know that my original career was in tech. So I came from like this tech world, and way back when I did that job because it was good money, and it was what was expected of me. I needed to be perfect. I needed to have this good job. I needed to be able to do all of these things, but it wasn't really me. It was things that were put upon me by others.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? I know
Yeah.
that sounds weird, but so for me, those decisions, those early careers was ego driven. It was not
Mm-hmm.
soul driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think it makes more sense than you're probably giving yourself credit for, because I think the majority of the people have lived that or are living that.
Yeah.
Let's use our examples of what we do now to what we did before. I have been in business, I have been in marketing, it's strategy, it's all these rules and tactics, like like all these different things. They pay the bills. But
Hmm.
my soul is the one saying, empower the women,
Yeah.
have the spiritual conversations, do all these things, take time out of your schedule to have calls like this, to share the information. Yes, it's nice. Yes, I love having the conversations, but this is totally soul driven.
Hmm.
That is so different. But the majority of us are like, but I have a 9 to 5 job, but I have this, but I have
Yeah.
that. Or I want to be a spiritual coach, or I want to help people, but I need bills to pay. So it's that constant struggle of the ego materialistic world, which isn't a bad thing.
Right.
I love a first class ticket. I love a nice expensive car.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with having material things. I think it's part of our human experience to be able to say, that's what I want. How do I get there?
Right.
But it's also part of the spiritual journey of saying, how do I, it's not even put the ego aside. It's how do I talk to my ego for it to notice that, hey, we can be both. We don't need to be fighting.
Exactly.
We can
Exactly.
do the spiritual and the ego and the material and the blessing. Why not?
Exactly. No, I totally agree. It's about balance, not one being over the other, but
Right.
that balance. And that's always the battle is the
Mhm.
balance. So I guess you can say the battle is in the balance. So,
Yeah. And let me add something to that before we go, because we do have to find balance in everything we do. And like you just said, including these two aspects.
right.
A few weeks ago, I was talking to somebody very spiritual, very high dimensional, very like way out there. And he asked me at the end something, and I go, my only advice to you, like my only thing I want to add is, remember you're living a human experience. You can't always be high vibing, talking with higher beings and like tuning yourself out and going into meditation 20 hours a day. You have a wife, you have a job, you have a life.
Right.
You came to experience this thing. You came to enjoy it. You didn't come here to check out to want to be up there because it feels better, because it does.
Right.
But it's like, no, we do need that balance. So I wanted to add that in, because somebody that says, I'm very spiritual and I'm all this, well, yeah, you need to bring it down a notch, because if you're all spiritual, then go back up there. It's like we came here to have a human experience
Right. Yeah,
and balance it.
that's kind of like living in the clouds. At some point you need to come down. And actually, while you were talking, it made me think of this phrase that says that we are not bodies with their soul, we're souls with the body.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we need to remember that we are souls with the body.
Yeah. Yeah. In
And
spiritual terminology, we call this the body, the temple, the avatar, the
right,
whatever it is. But it's because of that. What we are, first and foremost, whether we want to believe it or not, we are a spiritual being. I mean, that's what our soul is. We all have a soul. We want to say some people don't have a soul because they're heartless, but the truth is they have a soul. I mean, we are all spiritual. You know me and
so
my comments.
I know. All right. Well, which brings us to the next point. Let's talk about how the difference in these two have an impact on our own happiness and fulfillment. We've talked a little bit about this before, but we haven't talked about it in this aspect of
Mm-hmm.
ego versus soul driven.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've talked about how, living out what our soul wants can help with our happiness and fulfillment and joy. But let's take it back to this whole thing of what are the emotional and spiritual benefits of making soul-led choices, consistently making those choices. I mean, we know ego, it's like ego is very practical. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we need to make those practical choices. We just do. We live in a world that requires us to make practical choices. We can't always just be, like you said, out there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to be practical. But sometimes just being overly practical all the time, we get no fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
We get
Mm-hmm.
no fulfillment. And being able to make those soul led choices can help us find that happiness and find that fulfillment. And it's possible to have both. And that's what I want people to understand. We're not saying, oh, you gotta like just not put ego aside. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that, well, I'm saying anyway. I'm going to find
I'm
out.
just nodding.
I'm going to find out what she has to say in just a minute. But, we're saying, though, that sometimes you have to follow what your soul wants in order to have that happiness and that fulfillment and that joy. So, from your perspective, what are the emotional and spiritual benefits that you've seen for consistently making soul led choices?
Okay, I'm gonna say one thing because it's like on the top of my mind. Obviously, I have a
Okay.
virtual background. I keep smiling and my teeth disappear, so I'm laughing. Okay, done. It's out of the way. So the thing is, okay, exactly. Let's use this as an example. What are our emotions? We're here. We're doing a show. We're live. These things happen. Am I gonna go ahead and let my ego be like, oh my god, everybody now knows it's a virtual thing, and then your emotions start getting involved. Your brain starts getting involved. No, you look at it from a spiritual soul side of, we're here to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
We're here to enjoy life. If I allow my emotions to drag me down through a craziness thought of the practical and the strategy and like all these different things that we're talking about, versus going with the flow of the soul, going with the flow of the spirit, let's call it sixth sense and intuition. If we just go with that, we are generally happier. We really are because we're not forcing ourselves to do something that maybe somewhere deep down we don't want to, or we're doing it because we don't know why we're doing it, but we're just always doing it.
Mm,
So, following the soul led way of choosing things, doing things, living things is always going to bring us what the cliche phrases are, into a higher frequency. Literally, in my words, into a better mood. You're just happier. Maybe there's no actual exact reason why, but do we need a reason to be happy? Like sometimes we have to look for a reason, but do we really need to
right,
excuse why we're happy? No. We
right.
just get to enjoy it and tell the ego, I see your stress. I know you're freaking out. It's going to be fine. How? I don't know, but it always works out. And let it go.
Yeah. Well, and I would also add to that that we are happier when we're authentic.
Hmm.
And I feel like ego driven
How much more authentic do you want me? I keep losing my teeth.
Oh, goodness gracious. See, we always have fun here. You never know what's going to happen. So, tune in to see what shenanigans are going to occur. That's the thing about live shows. Like, you never know what's going to happen. So, but anyway, what I was saying is, I feel like we are happier when we're authentic. And I feel like ego driven decisions many times are not authentic to our true selves and our true nature. And when we can make decisions based on what our soul wants, what our intuition is telling us, what feels
Mhm.
right, we feel more authentic when we do that. And when
Mhm.
we feel authentic, that leads to more fulfillment and more happiness. At least that's been my experience. So,
It, and I agree. And can I share something?
yes, please
Um,
do.
I I had a client once. Let's use all of what we're talking about in very practical, mundane wording. She was in sales and she wasn't being authentic to herself because they give her a script. She has to say the script word by word. She
Mhm.
had to make the sale word by word. And yet, she was a person that was great at communications, great at connecting with people. People instantly fall in love with her. She was hating her job. So I remember helping her because she was like, I'm depressed, I'm this, I'm that, I'm like all these things. I don't feel connected anymore. I don't feel spiritual anymore. And when we actually got to talking about it, it was as simple as saying, oh my God, this is it. You're following
Mhm.
if you're not being authentic to your true self. You've always loved sales, but this came into your life for whatever reason it was, it came into your life. But once you make that awareness, and you, if you're able to change that, not everybody can just quit their job. She was able to, but not everybody was able to quit their job. But when you make that awareness, your mood starts changing because you
Mhm.
shift. You realize you're not the problem. You don't spiral. You don't do all these things because you're being forced to. And doors start opening up somewhere else
Yeah.
with whatever it is. So that's kind of like where the spirituality and reality, the way that I call it, actually merges in. If we are authentic, which is what you're talking about, if you're authentic with your true soul, with who and what you are, you can still play the game that you're being told to play, but in your unique way.
Right.
You get to do what you want to do and you're happy.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Same with me in my own personal experience. At the time when I was in tech, at first I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became stressful because I realized that it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I still like tech, but I like doing it on my terms.
Right,
So
right.
it's still part of who I am, but I like doing it on my terms and in the way that I like doing it. And that's part of my own authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right,
yeah, so I
right.
went on my own journey of what really feels right for me and what's authentic for me and everything. So I get it. The things that we're talking about, we've both have experienced this in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
So we totally get it that, and it's easier said than done. It really is, and it is a journey, but I feel like we all owe it to ourselves to go on that journey in
Mm-hmm.
order to be more authentic with ourselves, in order to find that fulfillment and to find what our soul really wants so we can enjoy our lives, the time we have here on this earth, following what our soul wants. So,
And I think a lot of us do know. There's something inside of us that maybe has been inside there for a while, or maybe it's a new aha. But I think each and every one of us does know to a certain degree what our soul wants. But the ego comes in and it's like, oh, you can't focus on that. That's not real, or that's not this, or that. And that's like that constant battle that we're talking about.
yeah,
Because I don't think, like, many, many, many years ago, people were talking about, how do I find my soul's purpose? And to be honest, there's always been a hint of it. There's always been a something at it.
true,
Maybe you just have to figure out, oh, that was it, right? But
right,
it's not like we're just gone with the wind and just walking around mindlessly looking for a purpose. Like we have ignored it or not paid
right,
attention to it, but we have an inkling of what it is. Maybe
right,
people don't want to tell other people because they think it's silly. It's not. If it makes that person happy, then go for it, whatever that go for it means.
right. Well, and we've talked about passion and purpose before,
Mm-hmm.
and we can have multiple passions, and the passion isn't the same thing as our purpose, and our purpose can actually change from seasons in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is our purpose at one season in our life can be something different in a different season in life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a totally different discussion than what we're having now. I just wanted to point out to everyone this is about making soul led choices. And the thing, though, is that if you learn to listen to what your soul is saying, to make the choices, that will help you to really be able to uncover your purpose in life. So,
Great. I can't add anything to that. Agreed. Approved.
approved. Yeah, yay. I got an approval from the spiritual expert here. Yay me. See, now that was ego. Yay me.
And that's okay. I mean, we can celebrate the ego too. We can celebrate the wins.
Right. And
That's
that's part of what I want people to understand is that it's
mm-hmm.
not an either or.
Mm-hmm.
Like ego isn't a bad thing. It's there for a reason. It's there to keep you safe when safe is necessary. But sometimes if you listen only to ego, you're not listening to soul. And that's where that balance gets off, and you may be doing your day to day, and you may be doing your hustle and grind, and you may be making the money and doing the job and everything, but are you enjoying it?
Right.
Are you finding fulfillment in that? Are you finding happiness in that? That's the point we're trying to make. That balance between the ego and the soul. You can have both. They can coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
They should coexist. That's the part that I think a lot of people don't realize. Nothing that we have is ultimately good or bad. Everything that we have can and should coexist in a holistic matter to
Right.
everything that is related. And I think that's part of what the ego, while you were talking, I wrote it down. It's like ego isn't the monster that we made it to be. Because it's true. It's like all these things, it's like, yeah, put the ego aside, do this, or then become more spiritual. But then it's also what we talked about. Then don't go and be all this spiritual and forget you're human.
Mm-hmm.
Everything should coexist one with another. How do you bring balance? The ego with the spirit works hand in hand. They are different spectrums, but they work hand in hand. They're all in it as a team. We're the ones that want to believe everything and everyone is separate. And that comes from the spirituality part. We all forget, or we were told that we were separate from spirit, whatever spirit was.
Mm-hmm.
Not even based on religion, not even based on anything. It's just we were taught that we weren't the same. We were like a human body that happens to have a soul, but nobody knew what that soul was. Well, the truth is, if everything is correlated, if everything is oneness, and if everything is all existence, and we are a part of everything, why are we trying to keep separating the ego and trying to be like, oh no, you tame down? Like, no, what is it that you want to show me? What is it that you're, it's a part of you. It literally is a part of you. And that separateness is the difference and the reason why spirituality is looked at so, oh no, I don't want to be spiritual. Well, you're it. I mean,
Right. Yeah. It's like you don't want to be spiritual, but whether you recognize it or not, you are spiritual.
right,
Part of you is.
right, right. It really is.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. All right. So let's talk a little bit about practical ways, since we've been talking about ego versus soul. Let's talk about some practical ways to discern the difference between ego and soul, because we all, whether you will own up to it or not, we all have these little voices in our head. Okay. And and sometimes a little voice will tell you one thing, sometimes a little voice will tell you something else, and they're all voices that are coming from inside. But more often than not, sometimes it's ego,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's soul. Most of the time it's ego for most of us. And that's why we need to learn to kind of temper that a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about different things, some tools or some practices that people can use to help them tune into their soul's guidance. One of the things I try to help my clients understand, even when I'm working with them from a naturopathic point of view, because again, naturopathy is all about body, mind, and spirit, and how they're all interconnected, and you have to address the whole body, the whole being. And most people don't do that. One of the things when I'm working with my clients is I try to help them to start understanding their own body and being aware of the cues that their body is telling them, so they can take care of themselves. Because I feel like they have come to the point that they are because they've been unable to
Mm-hmm.
listen to their body.
Mm-hmm.
They've been unable to hear the cues that their body is sending them, that, okay, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. So I think it's very important for us to be aware of not only our body, but our mind as well. That what our inner being is trying to tell us. Do you agree with that?
Completely. And to add to that, because sometimes it's like, okay, what do you mean? Like, how do I listen to my body? And I think what I add is, what I tell people is, how does it make you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Your feelings, your emotions are the ticket and the answer to, are you running away from something, or are you, oh, okay, this is possible? Are you feeling like you're inside a box with no light, or are you actually feeling like, oh, I'm not in a cage, and there's so many possibilities? So it's a matter of like the things that I suggest. Obviously, meditation. I know not everybody meditates, but one, for people who don't meditate, because, oh no, it's a bad word. Um, Again, it's like, I don't know. I have like all these cliche words with me today. Um, it's contemplate. The
Yeah.
only thing is, don't go into judgment. Don't go into thinking, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this good? Or when you start thinking,
Mm-hmm.
you're out of contemplation. But when you just sit there and you're just kind of, I mean, how many of us have had the experience that we're in the shower and we get like the greatest idea?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not thinking. Exactly. And that's a way of contemplation, and in a way it's a way of meditation. Meditation just means bringing down your thoughts to a
Right.
place of calm.
Right.
Not always possible. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I meditated with 3,000 thoughts in my head per second. So, you know, it's not always possible. But techniques like meditation, you know what, even doodling on a piece of paper,
Mm-hmm.
you just doodle, you just go ahead and do something out of the ordinary of your thought process that gets you into the feeling. And then you feel, okay, does this feel good? Do I feel lighter, or do I feel heavier? And there's times that for people, they look at me like, what do you mean? And I go, just try it,
Mm-hmm.
just try. And how did that make you feel? They're like, oh my God, I actually did feel kind of lighter. I'm like, okay, don't judge it, don't base it. Just literally, your own body tells you.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Meditation is often one of the first things I recommend. And you're absolutely right. Meditation has, like ego, it has a bad rap
Right.
among many people because it's like, "Ah, meditation." It's like, but
Can't do it.
meditation can be as simple as just sitting and just being quiet. When I have clients that are just trying to start off, one of the things I tell them is just sit and breathe. Pay attention to your breath. If you're
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to your breath and focusing on your breathing, you're not thinking about other
Mm-hmm.
stuff. That is a good way to meditate when you're first starting out. Only thing you're doing is paying attention to your breath. If
Mm-hmm.
you have to, you can do counted breaths. So you're paying attention to counting
Right.
to breathe, that you're not thinking about the other stuff.
Right.
One of the other things that I often recommend as well is journaling. It's like, write things down. Most people, it's like, well, I don't know what to write. Start with something as simple of, am I doing this out of fear or love? Or, what feels good right now?
Mm-hmm.
What would I like? Just write it down and see what comes up. And you mentioned doodling. That's another one of my favorites too. It's like, don't worry about what the picture looks like. That's where a lot of people get stuck in their head. That's the ego.
Right. Right.
Like, don't worry about what the picture looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Just start drawing. Whatever comes out, comes out. Let it flow. And I think a lot of people get hung up on, again, it's the shoulds and the
Mm-hmm.
how to's, and that's ego. That is not soul.
And the thing is, I keep saying it over and over because it's true. We've been trained to be perfect. What
Mm-hmm.
happened to us in art school when we were 4 or 5? And then the difference between taking an art class in high school. When you're 4 and 5 years old, anything and everything you drew was absolutely stunning and beautiful to your parents, to the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
to everybody, and you enjoyed it. And they show you, and this looks like a flower. And as a parent, you're looking at it like, where the hell's the flower? And you agree. You're like, yes, it's a flower. It's beautiful. But in high school, they're like, you're not an artist. That doesn't look good. Da, 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 da. So all the judgment comes back. And it's true what you're saying. To be able to be in a flow, which is a meditative state, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be in the flow, we do have to step back from control, from perfectionism, from judgment, from example. I'll give you a perfect example for me. When I started journaling years ago, nobody's ever going to read my notebooks. Plus my handwriting is a mess. Sometimes I can't even read my own handwriting. And yet,
Guilty.
and yet I would not write certain things. I would hold myself back from journaling certain things in case someone ever grabbed my thing.
Mhm.
And it got to a point a few years ago that I was like, wow, I'm still running with that pattern. I have to let that go. And little by little, because everything is practice, little by little, I started letting that control
Mhm.
issue go. And I wouldn't, let's say I was pissed off at somebody or I was venting about somebody, I wouldn't still write their name just in case somebody grabbed my notebook, but I would write an initial or I would write something
Mhm.
that would represent that person or thing or whatever. Nowadays, oh God, it's full out there. And the reason I'm sharing it is one, because we do have to let go of the things that we've been so unconsciously trained ourselves into doing or not doing. And two, it is practice. I didn't start journaling and being authentic and writing all my feelings down from day one. It's taking me decades
Mhm.
to get to the point that I am. Does it have to take everybody decades? No, of course not. But that's why we're sharing all these tools so that people can understand and learn and help themselves faster than it ever took the ones before.
Right. And that's part of why we have these conversations, because we've lived it, and we're not perfect, but we've lived it, and we have information that we have ascertained through our journey. And part of our purpose is to share that with others to help them on their journey.
Right. Right. And the thing is, this journey sometimes, uh, I'll use my honesty,
Uh-oh.
feels like a freaking roller coaster with
Yeah.
no seatbelt. Like there's times that
Yeah.
it really does feel like this is the end of me. Like what have I done? Or how do I get out of this? But yet that's, yeah, that's why we're sharing it, because it's part of the drama. It's part of the, we just have to go through it and keep sometimes crawling through it. But if we connect, which is back to what we're talking about today, if we connect to our soul, to versus the ego, if we connect to the soul is always going to try to make it nicer. The soul is always going to try to make it smoother. Doesn't mean that stuff is not going to happen. No, it just means you are able to approach it and deal with it and confront it and work through it from a different state than
Mhm.
anxiety and fear and paranoid, and like it's a completely different state because you're being authentic to you.
Exactly, exactly. And that doesn't mean that things won't ever go wrong or that everything's going to be perfect. But I think when we can come from a place of soul led versus ego driven, it helps us to ride out the roller coaster easier.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, completely.
It's like, are you going to ride the roller coaster with your hands in the air enjoying it? Or are you going to ride the roller coaster, gripping onto the bar in front of you in fear?
And screaming your little head off. Hmm. Yeah.
I love these little analogies we come up with.
But it's real, and I like the analogies because it's things that people can relate to, because sometimes it does feel like that.
Yeah.
It really does. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm not the only one that's going through this thing, because that's the other thing. A lot of people always say, oh, they look at you or they look at me or they look at anybody else. And all of us, because I do the same thing, we compare ourselves. Oh,
Right.
but I shouldn't be doing this. Look how perfect they are. No, I should have been. Da, 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 da. No, no. It's, we're all on different roller coasters. All of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. So let's talk now a little bit about resistance. There's always resistance. No matter what I do with any client, there's always some resistance of some sort. So there's always resistance. As I said earlier, easier said than done.
Hmm.
So let's talk about some common challenges that people face when they're trying to live a soul-led life. Let's talk about the resistance. So, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen and that I've experienced myself was trusting the process. It's like,
Hmm.
what, you know, you should do to let go of these things. But it's hard because ego steps in and it wants to be practical and it wants to be safe and all of that stuff. And when we're trying to follow a soul path, obviously there's no guarantees and there's no clear outcomes, and that can be scary. And then ego steps back in, place of fear. So we've already talking about lots of times the ego driven choices come from a place of fear. And a lot of that fear can come from trying to follow the soul path itself, which can be scary.
Hmm.
So it's like this back and forth and back and forth. And so what do you feel like the most common challenges are that people face when they're trying to make those changes?
Honestly, everything. Because we're all scared of the unknown. Well, let me rephrase that. Many of us are scared of the unknown. Some weird people actually love running into the unknown for the adventure and excitement of it. As you can tell by my choice of words, I am not one of those. I envy those because we don't know what's going to happen. Everything is in the unknown. And if we're making changes and our soul is leading us somewhere and it's a completely spin of life, of course it's scary. But for me, it's surrender. For me, it's letting go and surrender. And surrender is not easy.
No.
It is not easy. It is not easy to feel and see your life falling apart because we can't see what happens the next day. We don't have a, let me fast forward and see the trailer of what's actually going to happen so I can be okay with it. What you just said, we have to trust. And that's hard. So, how do
Mhm.
we surrender to, I don't believe being spiritual, being realistic, being the way that I am. Um, I don't believe in it's God's will or it's the universe's will or it's no, we have to take responsibility for it. But we can't take responsibility for something that we want to do and we want to change into
Mhm.
without knowing what's coming because it's scary. We
Mhm.
don't know if this decision is the right one or the wrong one. So for me, surrender has been more of a how do I surrender? For me, that was quite the lesson. Word dictionary wise, I would understand what the word surrender meant. How
Mhm.
to actually do it, I am not gonna lie. It took me breaking all the way down to an empty shell to literally say, it's not even that I'm surrendering, it's I have nothing else to give up. I became different. My mind started changing. My thoughts started changing. My ego, even the ego didn't know what to do with me. Like it was just so, but it took a couple of 2x4s on the head over and over and over and over until I literally got to pitch bottom or whatever the saying is, rock bottom. When I got to rock bottom to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to stop trying and I'm going to just go with the flow of what my soul wants because obviously whatever I've done and I'm trying and everything, it ain't working. So, but that's a really big one. That it really is.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, for instance, for me, we're sitting here, we're talking, and we're doing this show. And way back when I had the idea for doing the show, it's like that was scary. That was, and so sometimes overcoming resistance is just by just making the choice and taking a small step to move in that direction. I had this idea for the show. I sat on it, sat on, sat on it. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
I got to get everything just right. And I got to have an idea and I got to do this and that. And I had someone tell me, just do it. just jump in there and do it. Don't worry about what it's supposed to be or what it's going to be. Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took a lot for me to just make that choice from a soul level. I had this idea. I know what I wanted to do. Stop letting ego get in the way of not having it perfectly worked out,
Right.
and just do it. And that was one of the things I had to overcome. So when you're trying to, and this is for the audience, when you're trying to make those changes and you're trying to be more soul led, just know that you don't have to jump all in all at once. Start with baby steps. You can start with one thing at a time, one little choice, and eventually you'll start making more choices that feel good.
Mm-hmm.
So, like now, I love doing the show. I love having different perspectives coming on. I love being able to offer information to those in the audience that can help them on their journey. And this has become a source of joy and fulfillment for me. Now,
Mm-hmm.
am I making a ton of money off of it? Heck no.
Yeah,
But not yet. But I am enjoying it. And this is because I'm authentic and this was something I wanted to do and it came from my soul. And I made the choice to follow what my soul was saying and bypass the fear that my ego was saying
Mm-hmm.
to just do it.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to add something to that. There's a difference when like somebody told you, just go for it. That was great advice. But there's a difference when we talk to somebody and they'll be like, well, I don't think that's a good idea. And it shuts us down.
Yes.
And what I want to bring up is precisely on that. Sometimes our soul led actions and paths don't have to make sense to other people.
Mm-hmm.
We can let the ego get in the way with like excuses and, well, you don't have this ready and you're not this. That's different. But if we're waiting for an approval from somebody or we shut ourselves down, that maybe they're not meant to understand it because it's not their soul, it's yours.
Right.
I think that's very important to notice because they're like, there's a lot of people that are like, well, I've always wanted to do this, but X, Y, and Z always told me that's a bad idea. Well, it is for them, but that doesn't mean it's a bad idea for you.
True. True.
So that's a very important factor.
Along those lines, I'd like to also add to that, just because of the nature of the work that I do, I see some other perspectives in this as well, is that sometimes those ego choices also come from a place of limiting beliefs as well. And limiting beliefs, we've talked about this before, it can be things that other people have said to you. It can be things that life has taught you. It can be things that culture has taught you. It can be things that, were said to you or any of those number of things. But all of that in itself is a perspective. It's not necessarily good or bad in some cases. It's a perspective. It's how you view things. And those perspectives creates the information that the ego uses.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound? I know that sounds kind of weird. So I'm trying to put it like in terms where most people can understand. Rather, this it's been a journey for me too to kind of be able to explain things in a way that most people can understand and not in my super analytical tech sciencey science geek background explanations. So
No, and it completely does make sense because and I'm going to add to one of those, a lot of those limiting beliefs are also social norms. Like, let's put it this way. I'm originally from Colombia.
mm-hmm.
In Colombia, there is a saying, and everybody knows it's a saying, but it's a saying that when you actually look at people's lives, it's become a belief for them. Like, example, you call them, hello, how are you? How's life? Like, obviously, we use different terminology, right? And the typical response is, oh, working hard, not making much money, like the usual, how are you? It's actually become a belief.
Mm-hmm.
It, and the more we say it, the more we reproduce it, the more we repeat it, the more we do all these things, it does become a belief. And those are the limiting beliefs that I believe you're talking about, but come from a society, from culture.
Yes.
It's kind of like, we have to be aware from the spiritual side. We have to be aware of, is this thought mine? Is this like, does this make sense to my soul? If I believe I am this ultra powerful spiritual self that's here to have a human experience, does that make sense to my soul that, I have to work hard to do this, or I have to do
Right.
this to do this? No, if we're part of all, we're part of oneness, we're part of like creation itself. Does a drop of water actually question itself if it's a part of the ocean or not? No, it just
Right.
is. So that's the work that we do with spiritual work and empowerment, that we forget that we're not separate. But then we have to question all of our things, all of our beliefs, all of our feelings.
Right. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. And like I said, stuff that life has taught us, culture has taught us, parents have taught us, all of that becomes part of, excuse my tech term, our operating system.
It is. Yeah, completely.
It becomes part of our operating system, and that becomes how we see things.
Mhm.
And and that becomes part of our decision making process. And some, like you said, sometimes you have to step outside of the culture, outside of what has been taught, and say, is this right for me? And that's the first step towards making a soul led decision versus an ego driven decision.
Right. Yeah.
All right, so we're coming up on our time. So let's just kind of recap a little bit on all the stuff, because I know we've covered a lot of ground here. And I think our biggest things is that we need to understand the difference between ego driven and soul led. And part of being able to understand the difference between those things is being able to recognize where it's coming from. And Angelica and I have both shared some different ways on being able to go within yourself to kind of ask, okay, where is this really coming from? And all of that kind of thing. And I encourage all of you that are tuning in for this to use some of those tools to figure out which voice you're listening to. And but also understand that it's okay to have both, but you need to learn to balance it, because you can't let one take over the other. And just even in naturopathy, balance is key. That's what we call homeostasis, not only in body, but in mind as well. And being able to balance the ego and the spirit can help you be able to move forward, so you can still make those practical decisions, but you can also find that joy and that fulfillment as well. So, Angelica, what would you like to leave us with today?
I would say what we talked about, the ego isn't a bad thing. Um, like you mentioned, it's finding the balance. My last words would be, if you don't meditate yet, just start, like you offered. Count numbers, be aware of your breath when it comes in, be aware of your breath when it comes out. And little by little, you're going to start noticing if what the thoughts in your head are soul or are ego, because you're going to feel the difference.
Yeah.
Once we're able to separate ourselves from that constant thinking, when we give our body and our space and our mind, I'm sorry, when we give our mind and body the space, you're gonna notice a difference. You're not gonna be like, oh my God, was it supposed to be this or this or this? No, you're gonna feel it. And I strictly live by the fact that we're all unique and yet we're all the same. and whatever comes up for you from your own soul, go with it.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So, what an incredible conversation today that we had with Angelica. I hope you found our discussion on living a soul led life as inspiring and thought provoking as I did. I always love hearing what she has to say from a spiritual perspective on things. We explored the contrast between ego driven and soul led choices, the impact these decisions have on our happiness and fulfillment. And we've covered some practical ways to help you tune into your inner guidance. Remember, embracing your soul's wisdom isn't about being perfect, it's about progress and trust in the journey. As you move forward this week, I encourage you to pause, listen to your intuition, and take one small step towards living authentically. So, with a heartfelt thank you to Angelica for sharing her wisdom and insights. If you want to connect with her, you can learn more about her work. You can find her at angelicadelcarmen.com.
Yes.
Yay. And to you, the wonderful audience, thank you for tuning in and for being part of this journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone you think might benefit from these insights. And until next time, remember, wellness isn't a destination, it's your daily journey. See you soon. This episode is brought to you by Living Naturally for Life and angelicadelcarmen.com. Comment, like, subscribe.